Hello, everybody. Welcome to the interview of Marjan Bloem from the GUM Museum, Ghent University Museum. And she's the director, and she conducted the project of the creation of this new museum. So we thought with Marta Lorenzo, head of the UMAC University Museum Committee of ICOM, and me as chair of Universeum, to question her about this wonderful project, because it's not every year, unfortunately, that we have new museum coming. We already discussed with Marjan, because unfortunately, we're very happy that the museum emerged, but it was probably not at the best time of the most easy time for her and the team. Certainly very frustrating for them, also very frustrating for us, because we didn't get the opportunity to visit the museum. So before having that chance to go to Ghent and see the museum, we thought that we will have this exchange with Marjan to have her talking about the museum. So maybe not describing what you will find in the museum, but maybe we will more focus on the making of and some position that Marjan and the team decided to take in the process. So Marjan, thank you very much for accepting to be with us.
Very happy to.
So let's start. And so my first question will be about the what maybe it's very always interesting to know is, now that you've got a bit of time, the museum is open, so maybe it will be nice to listen to you to talk about the making process from your personal point of view and for a more general point of view.
So the genesis of the GUM, really, yeah,
exactly.
Was a long story, an organically grown, I guess, story that started small with some ideas in people's heads, a very small group, and then started to grow and grow. And actually this museum grew together with me on a personal trajectory, because when I started 10 years ago to think about maybe opening, or going to ask to open a museum at the board of the university, I was still a PhD student doing my research in animal anatomy. So I'm a veterinarian by training. And I spent most of my time in the dissection theaters doing my research. And the other part of my time I spent with the anatomical collections. So as I was doing this two-phased project, I would say.
So you were already connected to university collections because you had these anatomical collections.
Yes, and I was mostly given, I mostly gave practical exercises to students, some lessons with collection, right? So, and so I had my colleagues, the veterinarians, but I also had colleagues spread throughout the university who worked on other collections. And sometimes we met, but not that often. And we all had our own policies with and on these collections. But we didn't really know each other. So yeah, 10 years ago, we didn't really know each other. And sometimes we met and we would discuss a bit what we were doing, but nothing more than that, I would say. But then slowly, I guess with my trajectory and seeing each other more often and discussing, what the potential with these collections would be, this idea of opening a museum started to grow. For me personally, working with the collections and in dissection rooms, I started to collaborate a lot with artists. And that was a way to open up my eyes, because when I was communicating about science, but mostly about anatomy, of course. I was, teaching students or primary and high school students about anatomy. I was not teaching them about science. I was teaching, the result of my own research and my colleagues' research. But then collaborating with artists really started to give me other perspectives on these collections, on working on dissections and so on. They asked me different kind of questions, some completely different questions than what those students did. And that, first of all, that made me realize how little a broad public had sight on the scientific process, on what was science really about. And so I by that time, I also started to curate little exhibitions sometimes, and I started to involve those artists. And I started to see how that also attracted another kind of audience, and how the discussions during those exhibitions differed when I collaborated with artists. The discussions were more on process, on how do scientists think, what's the difference between artists and scientists, and so on, more than the focus on, this is this kind of bone, where in your body is this bone, that kind of. So that was kind of my personal trajectory, and I guess so those little exhibitions became bigger and bigger. At a certain point, we got a lot of press attention, and we all financed those temporary exhibitions with subsidies, and so not with university money, because there was no real interest at that time. But so that was growing and growing, and all of a sudden the boards realized that, well, maybe we can open a museum, and maybe there's, we can get some attention for the university as well. And that was about, I think, six years ago. And this small group of 6 people then sat around the table, and were like, right, we're gonna build a museum. And what are we gonna put in the museum? What is it going to be?
Who were the 6 people?
The 6 people were the 6 the curators of the different collections.
Okay.
Yeah, so for history of science, history of medicine, zoology, archaeology, ethnographic collection. So seven people, mainly. And we all had to do that added to our normal jobs. So we were sitting around the table, and they just asked, who wants to make the narrative? And I was like, yeah, I really want to do that. And that's how the story began. I think the first step I took when I started to think about, okay, a museum, a university museum, a science museum, what is this going to be? I started to visit a lot of museums in Belgium, but also abroad, and started to feel what a museum was for me, what the difference between those different kinds of museums was. And I also started to interview scientists from different disciplines throughout the university. And I asked them what science was to them. What is science? 1, and 2, if you want to build a science museum, what should it be like? I think I did 40 interviews roughly. And after a few weeks, when I took those interviews, I became very frustrated because they all contradicted each other. They started even to argue and discuss through me. They started to point to the colleagues, and they say they're scientists, they're not scientists, because it has to be falsity. I'm trying to look for the English word here. So there are different kind of definitions on what science is, and they were all discussing through me. And I think the first step or decision that was made, and that was crucial in what became GAM, was, maybe instead of trying to explain to people what science is, maybe we have to put this discussion, which is really interesting, on the table. Instead of trying to tell them this is science, let's just search together with the visitor and put these discussions and these contradictions on the table, because it makes it far more interesting. And it's a search that then you take alongside a visitor. So yeah, that was a crucial step, I guess. So I guess the collaboration with artists, and then the decision to focus on scientific process and not to proclaim, I would say, but then, start to evoke questions and search, activate the visitor. That was a very important decision.
So it started with with you as trained as a scientist, veterinarian, in history of medicine also. We work with collections, connected with other colleagues, curating also collections or using collections within the university. And this ambition, because you succeeded to get more and more visibility with different kind of project that involved artists, that allowed to going outside the university and to starting a conversation with a different kind of public, that helped the university to help and take the decision to create a new museum.
Yeah,
and
I guess, I guess some things happen at the right time, and the right people are at the right place. So different directors come and go, and at a certain point, there was the right board was there. And also, I think, also crucial, in 2017, we celebrated in Ghent 200-year the birthmark of the university, So that was also...
Right. So there is a commemoration process, which is very important because lots of projects started with the commemoration.
Yes,
event.
It's a momentum.
Yeah, and this is where you put a whale in a cathedral, isn't it?
Yes, that was the last bigger temporary exhibition that we did before opening, and that was the first time, I guess, when I really was invited to go and speak about this new museum, at the board of the university. Then we started to really become, they're doing something strange, but it's interesting what they're doing there. Yeah. So I put a whale skeleton in the St. Bavo's Cathedral in Ghent, where the altarpiece of Van Eyck is also displayed. So it has roughly more than 1 million visitors per year. So yeah, a lot of people saw the whale. Yeah. And it was... huh?
Wow.
Yeah, it's not, yeah. So the university is very happy then, of course. And the people, the church, hate to see him leave. So that was also a nice, yeah.
So maybe there are a few colleagues from Universeum that remember this story, because you had the opportunity to come and present the story to us. So I think we get disconnected a bit.
Yes.
That's fine.
That was fine.
Yeah, it's okay, because I was talking, so it's fine. Okay, it's recorded and we're not going to clean it. So we're going to have this this moment anyway. What I was saying is that I think that we had the chance to listen to you about presenting the project, and you talk about this this well event within the cathedral. But what I didn't get, and which I learned in your book, I will come back to your book later. It was the connection. I didn't know you were very veterinarian, and I didn't know that you participate to the autopsy of the whale. So you had a connection with the skeleton. So I didn't know that. I think it's very important, because it also helps you. I think it helps you also to, if I understand well, to assume the not the gratuity, but to trust the the impact of scientific collection, a well, without giving a context to the public. So it was a starting point for you maybe to try. I'm giving a well to see in a church to people, and it's connected in a sense to the university, to the scientific process, to the history of science, to my personal training and my personal history, to this, to the fact that it's not only it's a skeleton, it has a scientific name, but it's also, it can be seen as an artistic performance. So it was all this. Now I read in the book and listening to what you just said. It was also a kind of making it possible, and
Yeah,
going afterwards
I
to
think.
do it in a museum.
How? Excuse me.
Sorry, and afterwards maybe it helped also to unlock some, you know, some,
Yeah,
even for you to unlock
yeah,
some point of view that help you to deconstruct and to open your mind, as you
yeah,
say many times, go think out of the box, and
yeah,
then say, okay, it might be possible to think a museum completely in a complete different way, and
yeah.
especially a science museum.
I think the dissection of whales when I was still a researcher in anatomy, what that taught me was, first of all, you know, when you arrive at the beach, you're still first of all a human being, you know, and you arrive at the beach and there's this gigantic animal, and you feel sad, you know, you have all these kind of emotions, and then at a certain point, you're also a bit excited because there's something new and you want to start cutting, and I don't know, all these kind of emotions, human emotions, and then you have to start your protocol. You know, the autopsy, it has a protocol, and then you also realize why, because all these emotions then you have to put aside a bit, you know, to be able to collect in a certain data in a certain way, and so that it's reproducible afterwards and so on. So that's also when I realized that this whale is kind of a metaphor on how you talk about science to people. Because the first thing what people ask you when you come back from the beach, they don't ask how the protocol went. They ask you how it felt, how it smelled, and it's a very good story, you know, to go and try to explain to people, this is how I felt. I was really overwhelmed, and then I needed, you know, the scientific tools to do what I needed to do there as a scientist. So for me, it learned me how to speak about science and have people understand it, because they understand that you would feel overwhelmed as a human being standing on the beach, and that you would need to be trained on how to deal with that, you know. And then putting the whale or displaying the whale in the cathedral, people also felt, you know, overwhelmed. And this feeling of being standing so close, because I put it really low in the cathedral. So it's of course a huge building, and the skeleton was huge, but I put it in some kind of place where they all of a sudden bumped into it, and they could touch it if they wanted to. So it's almost like the whale would eat them. You know, the mouth was a bit open, and they were and people looked at it in a different way. Some of them did touch it, and it was okay. But a lot of you know, I went back a lot of times afterwards and observed people, how they would look at this big skeleton over there, and how they would take their kids on their arms and point at things. It's so you also, apart from bringing over information, you also evoke emotion, and let them investigate themselves. And they're not even aware that at that point they're doing science themselves, you know, observing and trying to interpret what they see.
Okay, that's one of the point, because you're, as I understand, in the museum, one of the things that you try to emphasize in the museum is what you just described, the open up to the vulnerability and the humanity of the scientific practice. So how can you give the public to understand that? But it's not only what you're also trying to question is also how to get the public be active and not passive in the way of learning scientific concepts. So this is, of course, I think now lots of colleagues are trying to have well aware about this this kind of very passive approach of science museum that we want to overcome, go beyond. And that's why your project is very exciting. And so one of the things also, you talk about the museum as a refuge, at the refuge. So it's that maybe that because you need to to make the people, the public inside comfortable, um, and feel allowed to think by themselves, but also to have a critical approach, because we this is something we want to praise, is the science, the critical spirit of the people also, not to take things for granted necessarily, but to question, to feel allowed to question, and to question even science. So
Yeah. How do you do that? Is
how
that
do you do that? Yes.
I think so. There's two different kind of questions. Is one, how do you activate the visitor, and how do you create an environment where people feel comfortable enough to feel like it's a refuge? To go outside society for a little while in a different environment, right? So activate the visitor, I would say surprise is very important. When I visited all those museums during, when I was doing the research to build the GOM, what I started to notice is that I didn't get surprised anymore, of course, by certain objects or by the building, but not by the narratives, because lots of museums tell the same narratives. Natural history museums, there's always a hall of evolution. There's always, and also in the fine arts, it's always chronologically, and it's kind of, and what happens when you're not surprised anymore is that you become passive. You're on a stroll and you're not really observing anymore. So you kind of have to surprise them by putting a whale in the cathedral, or in GOM, we display all the objects interdisciplinary. So every team in the museum is we carefully selected objects in such a way that not all disciplines, but let's say a very broad variety of disciplines is represented. So an object of the history of science can be next to a zoological object, next to an object from archaeology, next to, so it's this kind of juxtaposition that people don't expect, and surprises them, that activates them, because they start to think, why are these objects together here? I don't understand. And that's already first step to activate. To become a place of refuge, I think scenography and how people feel when they come in is so important. So I think in GOM, what happens when people come in is that they're a bit silent, because the light is quite dimmed. It's quite soothing in a way. For me, it has to be a place where you calm down, where all these extra environmental stimuli are gone. So you create the environment where people are open to what they see, they're surprised, and when you visit the museum together with somebody you know, or maybe not know, I don't know, there's all these kind of different things that you see and you're surprised, so it activates conversation. So I think, to activate, I would say surprise, and we did that by juxtaposing. Whether that works or not, I will tell you in a couple of years, but when we evaluate. But I've got different kind of reactions on this approach of juxtaposition. The people who expect the classical science museum, they would say it's chaos in here. I'm lost. Where is the hole for archaeology? It's spread all over. And so they are a little bit in chaos, but then again, that's also breaking open maybe their rigid view. So it's interesting that you evoke that kind of reaction in people. And the refuge kind of place, well, I can only say that now when people need this kind of places where they can feel beauty and experience and feel comfortable in a space to converse with people maybe they don't know. I can only observe right now that that's happening in Ghent. I see people walking through and having conversations. Very comfortable and very, yeah. So for now, I can only say that I observe with this, of course, we have to do proper evaluation, but I can only say that I'm pretty happy with what I see right now. Yeah.
Excellent. And the other thing that struck me in your intentions, so this museum as a refuge, but it's also the role of the curator in this. So okay, I will not give the whole perspectives, but what you define as one of the role of the curator is to create an intelligible language. I think this is the word you're using. Yes, create an intelligible language for all the public. But it's not only it's the connections between the public and the scientists, but it's also between the scientists themselves, because you talk about interdisciplinary, and this is one of the, of course, the characteristic of science nowadays, that they're very specific. So even in the same discipline, some of them don't understand each other. So even more in a different discipline, but also with artists and so on. And I very much like this image. It's more than an image, but this thinking of the curator as the creating a language to make all those people understand each other.
Well, that has to be the effort, I would say. I think in order for your museum not to become anecdotal, or you have to try and find some kind of a universal language, timeless and universal. And I think that's one of the reasons why in Ghent the main narrative is science philosophy, because that gives you the as a curator, it gives you the tools to go and zoom out, and look at the process from a distance. And by zooming out and trying to just observe and tell the visitor what you see when you look at science from a distance, it's almost like you're discussing together with the visitor what you see. We look at the distance to science, and this is what I see. So taking that position already is some kind of a universal language, I would say, or it's trying to search this common view with visitors. So I think the choice for a science philosophical narrative was also crucial, I think, in this story of the Genesis. Yeah.
Okay, and this is not the last, but before last question, we understood, and it's very present in your book, but also in your presentation. I remember at Universeum conference, the connection with art and with artists, so Science and Art Museum. And I would like to question you on that, because of course I do understand. And I do understand how an artistic performance or approach can help to to go in this deconstruction process, or to give more cultural dimension of scientific knowledge. But I'm wondering also if that's not, if that if this if this is obvious also for the public, if it's not already kind of well educated people, or museum curator like us, who used to go to contemporary art museum, or very, who
Mhm.
had the culture of this kind of understanding those kind of performance. So, and I was wondering if sometimes art is not as difficult to understand for some kind of public as scientific knowledge.
Yeah, probably is. Yeah, but why I find it interesting to put in also in the public display of the museum and in the program and in the, it's because it's, for me, it adds another kind of perspective. So first of all, like I said before, we are zooming out and looking at the scientific process, and I would say we are we are first of all a science museum, but maybe even more a research museum, the museum on research, and how do human beings handle questions? How do they do research, right? And then there's the scientific methods, and that enables you to gain objective knowledge. It's the
Mhm.
most valid tool that we have so far. But then next to it, artists are also challenged with questions, and they also approach these questions with a research method. It has a different goal, and it's a different kind of method, but they also have a research method. And if you put these two next to each other, it helps, I think, for the visitor to better define what then it is exactly that defines the scientific method, because you put these different methods next to each other. And also, what I also find appealing in the artistic approach is that artistic work allows the individual approach, the individual emotion, and so on. Science and scientific objects, it's difficult because we are not interested in the individual case. We're always interested in to make it broader and to make it more universal, or to talk about numbers, bigger numbers, not one individual case, right? But that makes it less tangible, I think, for visitors, and it makes it less about them, about their personal experience. So allowing that personal experience, and artists evoke this kind of personal experience, makes it more, I think, it makes it less, or it lowers the threshold, I would say, to experience a museum visit, I would say.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's uh, I do also, what I do like, what you didn't say there but you describe in a book, is also to remember that this, putting those two methodology in perspectives, scientific and artistic one, approach and practices and so on. Uh, it's also helped to understand that in art you also have rational approach.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's not only a pure hazard or creativity or something, but it's also, there's also lots of techniques and things that are made on are there because it's a kind of way of doing it, and so on and so on. But on the other way, it helps also to understand that in science there is this kind of creativity where we're expecting more rationality in the approach. So I
Mhm.
think the dialogue there, it's working very well in the way you put
Again, it's about surprise people.
it. Yeah, exactly,
People tend to look very rigidly to concepts,
exactly.
and if you confrontate them with that rigid view, they're surprised, and then they're more open. That's the hypothesis.
Exactly, openness. This is what we want.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
you were talking about, okay, I will define the GUM Museum as a science museum. What about a university museum?
Or a museum of research, but yeah, the connection
Yeah,
to the
sorry,
university.
you're absolutely right. You say the Museum of Research. Sorry about that,
Yeah.
which is a very good one. Yeah. Oh, Museum of Research, but what about University Museum?
True. So we made a very conscious decision and not promoting that publicly too much, that it's a university museum.
So you are expelled from Universeum. No, sorry. Sorry, that's okay.
Yeah, no. I mean, it took a while also for me to make that kind of switch, on how do you communicate, because we are also proud of our universities, but you know what, the visitor doesn't really care, and it's all about putting yourself in the place of the visitor. How do visitors look at your museum, and what are you all about? And if they get the idea that that museum is all about that university, maybe your colleague academics will be interested, but it's more difficult to reach other kind of audiences. And I think it's very important that we are inclusive. I also want to reach the people in some neighborhoods, or maybe never go inside a university building. And promoting it as a university museum to the public, it's I think the threshold to come in is quite high. Of course, I'm proud that it's a university museum, and I see all the added values of the connection with the research community and so on, and with students. But I think the way the identity of your museum and how you place it in the local community, in the city, and so on, I think it's good that we have now our own public identity. And yes, people are aware, I think, when they walk outside, yeah, this is the Ghent University, but it's not our main promotion tool. It's not, I think it would be I think it's very wrong if people would feel like it's like the marketing machine of a university.
Sure.
And we try to avoid that as much as possible, because after all, in our mission statement, it's all about promoting critical literacy, critical thinking, and science literacy, and so on. So we have kind of the same mission as our university, but we have a different approach, and we try to communicate to the audience in a different way. And I think in order to obtain that, we had to have our own identity.
Yes, of course. So you're talking about, yeah, of course. But would you define University Museum as just a kind of marketing things? Because
No.
But
I'm trying to see how the visitor sees it.
Yes, of course. But at least you're starting with the collections, and the curators were curators from university collections and so on. So I think that it's also very interesting that you define the museum as the museum of research. So I think it's very very interesting, and I would say, I'm just wondering, and I think this question is not very pertinent, but still, I would say that the anchoring of the project within the university help having this challenging process and this challenging confrontation with how to talk about science to the public. I think you achieve something great, because I agree that you have to get rid of this not only institutional thing, but it's also the heavy consciousness of what is scientific knowledge, and how shall we talk about science in public, and so on and so on. So having the opportunity and giving I mean, building a museum on how can we get out of those two constraints, which are very strong. I think it's great, and it's yeah, I think it's great.
It's still an exercise. We're still positioning ourselves, and I'm quite conscious that we want to stay the museum of research, so focus on the process. And of course, now that we're open, also our own academics have discovered us, and they see us as a new platform to communicate science or their results. And it's kind of, yeah, it's a constant, I wouldn't say battle, but it's an exercise. And no, we would be happy that you come and talk during your research and about maybe all the failures that you've met and so on. That would be great. If you're done after 10 years and you want to come about talk about the success story, no, there are other platforms to do that. So, but it's going to be an exercise, I already see it now, to keep that ground, you know, and also that's also one of the reasons that we are this own identity within the university that gives us a bit more freedom to maneuver, I think.
Okay. In any case, thank you very much.
Very welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, that was very nice. I'm very happy we have this discussion together. And okay, for those who didn't commend the book, I recommend you have all the information in one of the email of Universeum and UMAC. And you also have a link for the TED presentation you made if you want to know more about the museum and the scientific and cultural project of the museum. And hopefully we will be able to visit you, the sooner the better, hopefully this year. But in any case, next year, because 2022, we will have a Universeum conference in Belgium. And there's no doubt that there will be there will be a visit to the GUM Museum.
Yes.
Okay. Until then, Marjan, thank you. Take care. Good
You
luck
too.
for
Stay
everything.
safe. Yeah.
And yes, and we will very happy to promote your museum. So please send us information anytime you feel necessary to. Thank
Thank you.
you. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.